He went, and then the whole room behind her were blasted. But she didn't make a move. And she said, okay, I hope I will die and I will be recorded on Guinness as the first one who was killed while smoking the water pipe in Nablus. So that was the story. I mean, you can see what it means to live in such a place. الحمد لله بسلامتك حجة. هاي إلي بدي أخذها أنا هدية.
When violence is enacted through architecture, architecture must somehow rise to resist it. It must find the tools, and it must find those tools within its own toolbox. Now that most war take place in a city, that most war is urban warfare, architecture becomes really the most important evidence to read the contours of that violence. We can reconstruct the battle itself and what happened by looking very closely at the ruins. I gained the confidence of the EU to fund this project called Forensic Architecture to present architectural facts as evidence in legal and political forums. One of the major projects that we do is an analysis of drone warfare in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Gaza.
Forensic Architecture are working with the mandate to look at particular strikes and to do, as far as we can, accurate reconstructions against which to assess the competing claims about the strikes themselves.
In Gaza during 2008-2009, the IDF started employing a kind of a tactics of warning. They were shooting a warning missile on the roof of buildings, waiting for about 3 minutes before they demolished the buildings completely. The Salha family is one of the saddest and most horrific instances where a new kind of warfare that tries to be legal, a kind of a humanitarian war, has gone completely wrong. Dear Mr. Fayez Salha and Mr. Noor Salha, thank you very much for coming here to speak to us. Our work has been actually an attempt to reconstruct what happened between the warning shot and the lethal shot. How a family gets organized, how they understand the options facing them. The family was trying to leave the house. They divided themselves into two groups.
أنا والأشخاص اللي كانوا معي تقريبا من هاي الناحية لعند ممر خروج أو نزول على سلم البيت.
The second group, when it was just about to exit through the main door, the big bomb hit, demolished the building, and killed 7 members of this family. Unpacking a situation like that is using a very particular story, the story of a family and the story of a house, and the traces that we can see in this house to pose a kind of a political challenge to Israel humanitarian war in Gaza. Your personal tragedy is enormous. It's also a part of the tragedy of the Palestinian people.
وهذا العزاء هو عزاء ناقص يجب أن يكتمل في حال أن تنال قضية عائلتي العدالة الدولية.
I love this land and I care deeply about both peoples that live in here. And I think looking at the landscape, I see this kind of slow process of killing. I would have loved to practice my architecture free of the constraints and violence of this conflict, but I think that to be an architect is not only to build and to contribute to this destruction of the place that I love most, but to use architecture as a way to both interpret, protest, and resist.
This is architect Va Chon Nya. His self-appointed tasks? To create sustainable housing for the rural poor. To bring tropical beauty back into Vietnam's choking urban spaces. And to convince developers that his dreams are attainable. But changing minds can be as hard as altering spaces. Rebel architecture continues with greening the city on Al Jazeera.
Examining the impact of today's headlines.
If they're both hardliners, what then happens?
Setting the agenda for tomorrow's discussions.
How likely is it that Ukraine is actually going to get the rebuilding support that it needs?
International filmmakers and world-class journalists bring programs to inspire you.
Protesters took their anti-government...
I don't think I can return to my old life anymore.
France is eroding some of its most prized freedoms.
On Al Jazeera.
In the year 1271 AD, a young Italian merchant set out on an extraordinary journey. Carrying letters from the Pope for the great Kubla Khan, Marco Polo traveled through war-torn regions, following dangerous roads from the Holy Land and beyond. Today, chasing the shadow of Marco Polo, Professor Zhao has traveled from China to Venice, with searching questions of how the relationship between East and West has changed. Marco Polo on Al Jazeera.
Which side is winning, chaos or control? What does a new forever proxy war mean for America and NATO? As long as Americans keep consuming, prices are going to keep going up. Why didn't Joe Biden see inflation coming? How did we get so much wrong?
A quizzical look at US politics, the bottom line.
I'm Tom McRae in Doha. The top stories on Al Jazeera. The outgoing UN human rights chief has released a damning report into China's alleged human rights violations against the Uyghur minority. Victoria Gatenby reports.
Michelle Bachelet's long-awaited report is a damning indictment of China's treatment of the Uyghur population. It found that Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim groups held in detention camps have been subjected to torture, including forced medical treatment and sexual and gender-based violence. Bachelet's report was commissioned more than 3 years ago and was due to be published last year. It was finally released 30 minutes before her term as UN human rights chief ended.
Obviously, there's pressure from the Chinese government on the UN system, but it's the High Commissioner's job to investigate human rights crimes around the world, including China. So we're very glad to see at least the report is out. Obviously, we wish it was released sooner.
China has condemned the report. It says its policies in Xinjiang fight what it calls terrorism and provide Uyghurs with better economic opportunities.
We all know so well that the so-called Xinjiang issue is a completely fabricated lie out of political motivations, and its purpose definitely is to undermine China's stability and to obstruct China's development.
In the past, Bachelet's faced criticism for not being forthright about the persecution of the Uyghur community. Her visit to China in May was widely condemned as a whitewash, with the US State Department calling it a mistake. Human rights groups say her report is better late than never.
This is a blueprint, really, for member states, especially those who sit on the Human Rights Council, to adopt a resolution that creates an independent and international mechanism so that you can start investigating these crimes and you can start identifying the perpetrators and prosecuting those perpetrators.
This is the latest of many reports detailing human rights abuses against Uyghurs. But this one carries the weight of the UN, and those campaigning for justice hope it'll mark a turning point. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
A team of UN inspectors will soon cross the front lines in southern Ukraine to arrive at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Their convoy left the nearby city of Enerhoda earlier this morning, despite what they've called significant risks. Shelling near the plant has sparked global concerns for potential nuclear disaster.
I am going to consider the possibility of establishing a continued presence of the IAEA at the plant, which we believe it's indispensable to stabilize the situation and to get regular, reliable, impartial, neutral updates of what the situation is there. So wish us luck. We are moving now. Thank you for your interest. It's very important that the world knows what's happening here.
2 young Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces during raids in the occupied West Bank. One of the victims was shot when Israeli soldiers stormed the Balata refugee camp. The second victim was killed by Israeli police in Al Baray city. Rosmah Mansour, the wife of Malaysia's jailed former Prime Minister Najib Razak, is in court and about to hear her fate in a corruption trial. The 70-year-old is charged with soliciting and receiving $1.5 million worth of bribes. The US has authorised its first update to COVID-19 vaccines and booster shots that target the Omicron strain. The Food and Drug Administration hopes the modified Pfizer, BioNTech and Moderna jabs will provide a higher protection against more contagious variants. And fires in Brazil's Amazon rainforest surged in August to the highest for the month since 2010. More than 40,000 wildfires have been reported. These numbers come as Brazilians are preparing to vote in the upcoming presidential elections. Well, those are the headlines. The news continues here on Al Jazeera after Exiled. Up next.